Now, let's have a look at this map. I'm going to shrink it out just a little bit so you can see that. Here we go. So, when you look at this map here, do you recognise this one at all? I've got a boundary edge there, and it goes round. Do you recognise that map? Now, this is an ancient map. Anyone recognise it? Press pause and tell me what you think this is representing. Now, have you had any ideas? Okay, well, maybe not. What about if I turn it upside down? Do you recognise it now? Let's zoom in on this particular area here. Now, this might be familiar to you. Do you recognise this area from the other maps? What do you think? Well, this is a map of Western Europe and the Middle East and North Africa, stretching over into Iran and into Pakistan, Afghanistan, and there. Very different from the map we saw earlier. Let's have a look at the same map we saw earlier, and we can see that's it there, and that looks very different now. So we can see similar things are being represented. The River Nile is in a lot of detail. We can see the Middle East there is in an awful lot of detail, so a lot clearly is known about that area. But what I wanted to show you is this fascinating feature. You see, here you have the Kingdom of Italy. You can just about recognise the boot. Here you have the Kingdom of Sicily. So let's have a look at Sicily at its true size. So returning to my more digital map, I'm going to be able to show you where Sicily is. So if you can see here, we have got Italy there, there's its boot, and there is Sicily. Okay, so you can see Italy is a huge country, and its borders defined by mountains at the top there. So it's had quite a stable borderline in that respect for many years. And we can see there, it looks like the Italy is kicking the Kingdom of Sicily just there, and it looks quite small in comparison. So let's have a look back at our original ancient map. Well, here we are back at our ancient map, and as you can see, Italy looks fairly big, but not as big as it actually is. But the Kingdom of Sicily is looking really, really big. Why is that? Well, because quite often in the ancient world, kings would want their country on the map, but they wouldn't want it as to its true size. Their kingdom was the most important one. Therefore, they would have their kingdom larger than it actually was. So they would expand the size of it and make it look a lot bigger than it actually was as compared to others. So when you look at Sicily, Sicily is nearly half the size of France, which it isn't in real life. It's about half the size of Portugal and Spain altogether. And we can just see that's just not true when we have a look at it. So there's that kind of need for your country to look bigger than all the rest. And then on the map, there's lots of things that they know about. So the area of Italy and Spain and North Africa are hugely detailed with lots of villages. But when we come up here to England, just here, there's England. And we have France just there. Very little is known about that, so there's not much detail. And then we'll return it to how he had it originally. Now, here we have another map. Now, this map is quite interesting because it's got 3 different shades. So why has it got 3 different shades? Well, this map is showing us how an empire has expanded. So we can see the dark green. The dark green is represented and shows just how far Muslim lands with sort of Baghdad was eventually became part of. They're represented in the dark green. So you can see those Muslim lands early on started in one particular area and were confined to there. Within 30 years, they had expanded to this colour green here. And so that's when we start seeing Baghdad rise up as a city of culture, as it was caught up in that expansion. And then if we go over to here, about 100 years plus, we go into the light green, and you can see that the Muslim Empire had spread all across North Africa into Spain. So those areas that had been taken up by the Byzantine Empire, formerly known as the Roman Empire, that's really shrunk down. And then this other empire has come along and occupied a lot of those lands. So again, maps can show phases of development too. And then here we've got an explanation of the widest extent. A sort of a religion or a culture can occupy as it spreads to its widest point. So we've had a look at ancient maps. Here is another one. Okay, and do you recognize anything on that ancient map at all? Perhaps if we took a bit of a close-up, is there anything you recognize on that map at all? And I've highlighted 3 particular locations. Now think back to the first thing that I showed you. Let's zoom in a bit more and move those down if we can. Here we go. Is there any of those locations you may recognize? Here we go, there's one there. Do you recognize that one at all? Now, if you do recognize that particular location, and then as I hold it up, okay, those particular locations are very familiar to us now because we've got Dover and London. And what you're actually looking at was an ancient version of a map that involved the United Kingdom. And as we saw that right at the beginning, we know this isn't a particularly accurate shape of that area. So we've got Dover. Here we go. There we are, Dover. And then we've got Hastings just there, which was that Hastings. And then we have London there. So we can see, yes, people understand that Dover was close to France, and that Hastings was also on the coast, and they got roughly the names right, but the actual shape of the United Kingdom is probably a bit of guesswork by this particular cartographer. So we'd had a look at maps that were from ancient times, right from the Middle East. This one was produced in the 1650s and is meant to show the United Kingdom again. Now, this map maker had been a little bit lazy because not only did they fail to get the shape correct, but you'll notice a lot of these names as you start to zoom in, you don't really recognize until we start to get to here. And here we get names such as, it's not overly clear, I'm having a few problems with the camera, such as, I'll pull out again, such as Londinium, and the Latin name for Richborough. And if you remember, I started the video showing you where Richborough, the Roman fort, was, and here it's being highlighted in this particular location, and we then have the Latin name for Canterbury and then the Latin name for London. So in this particular occasion, the cartographer has used obviously lots of other sources to create his particular version of the map, but in doing so has used a lot of medieval Latin and obviously ancient knowledge, but that again hasn't produced a particularly accurate map. But since the map was commissioned by Scotland, when we look up at Scotland, we can see that then that country becomes quite dominant there and is shown in more detail with forests and is shown bigger than England, whereas actually it's the other way around and England is bigger than Scotland. So what do I want you to do once you've had these maps? Well, I want you to make a version of your own ancient map. You can make an ancient map of whatever you want. So you could make an ancient looking map of your home. You could make an ancient looking map of your own road. Or if you wanted, you could choose a location in the world and make an ancient looking map there. You'll be able to use perhaps similar artistic license that early cartographers did. Maybe you'll be able to find some examples yourself and take ideas from those. Quite often cartographers, if they weren't sure what something was, then they might put a few monsters in the pictures just to sort of fill it up and make it look great. And there's lots of examples of here be monsters and here be dragons appearing on maps because they didn't know what was in that location. I seem to remember a fantastic map from hundreds of years ago, which showed one-eyed men, and the men were like huge cyclopses, and the cartographer didn't know what was there, so put those in there as a scary kind of land to make the map look a lot more interesting. As trade increased and as wealth increased, people needed more accurate maps to work out where they were going in order to get to somewhere on time. But what I want you to do is think about where you would like to make a map of, make that map. You could make it look as ancient as possible. You could do a map of Kent and make it look bigger than all of the rest of England combined. Or you could do a really detailed, accurate map if you wanted, as we saw on some of the others, detailing different locations and done to scale. I'll leave that up to you, but make it as inventive and as colourful and as interesting as possible, just like the ancient cartographers did from all those years ago.